Yes, what a beautiful place to be. So we're here talking about the film, The $6 Billion Man by Eugene Jarecki, about the case of Julian Assange. The film is going to have its world premiere on Wednesday, 2 days from now. So in the course of this panel, we're going to kind of, refrain from talking about details of the film. I look forward to all of you seeing it. There'll be a lot to sink your teeth into. But even without seeing the film, there is a lot to discuss about what the history of Julian Assange and Wikileaks means for the state of journalism today, the state of transparency in government today. And so those are some of the bigger themes that we're going to try to get into today. So I'm going to bring up our panelists, starting with the filmmaker Eugene Jarecki. Human rights lawyer who worked on Julian Assange's case for many years, Jen Robinson. And from WikiLeaks, Joseph Farrell. So, Eugene, we're living through a time of rising authoritarian governments, increasing pressure on the press, including record rates of journalists being murdered. Against this, in this historical moment, what is the case of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange say about our times now?
I think it has everything to do with what we're seeing happen in the world right now. The WikiLeaks saga and Julian Assange's personal saga that we cover in the film and the work of Joseph and of Jen over all these years has been the work of trying to warn the world that something was moving in an extremely dangerous direction, led by the United States, which was violating its own apparent commitment to democracy when, for example, during the Iraq War, it was WikiLeaks that taught the world the level of war criminality that America was engaged in the pursuit of empire, in the pursuit of oil, of resources, that they were willing to trade democracy for profit. And it was WikiLeaks that brought so much of that to light. And there's a figure in the film, Yanis Varoufakis, who talks about Julian in no less terms than a modern Prometheus, in that it was Julian and WikiLeaks that brought fire to modern people in the form of knowledge about that which is happening in our world that we must be concerned with. It's no secret to anyone that we all are very insecure about the direction of this world, and we need that information more and more. And I would say that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were a kind of canary in this coal mine that were warning us way back then about this. And the $6 billion is what the US was willing to spend to bury that and to block us from knowing that. And so it has everything to do with the fact that that which they warned about is now running amok, fully out of control, and it's up to us to understand what are we going to do about that.
Well, since you use that figure, 6 billion, can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
It's important to see the film to really understand how that worked, but suffice it to say, $6 billion was the bounty paid by the United States to destroy Julian Assange. And we have the receipts, as it were.
Joseph, can you start by giving your brief history with WikiLeaks, how long you've worked for the organization, which lasts until today?
I was seconded by the Center for Investigative Journalism for 2 days, and that was 15 years ago. It started off at WikiLeaks. I worked on all the major releases. What was the question?
Well, let me ask this. Over those 15 years are incredibly eventful, and Eugene's film does a really good job at kind of taking us through them in a concise way. Over that time, there are people who stuck by WikiLeaks and people who had been inside the organization who left WikiLeaks. And I wonder, what was it that has kept you invested all this time?
Well, for so long of it, If you think that I've known Julian for 15 years, but only 6 months of that, he was actually a free man. So a lot of what kept most people there was the injustice that somebody who had given so much information to the world, and information that keeps giving. So, for example, the cables are still being used now, and they're being quoted. New parts of cables are being quoted in relation to current ongoing wars. The fact that some of the publications that we did have been credited for stopping the Iraq War, and then the fact that we know from all those publications who the perpetrators of these crimes were, and yet those people were completely free. And the one person who brought this to everybody, and who was also gave us, the readers, so much agency, was the person who was being persecuted. So it was the pure injustice of that, and also because it's an organization that actually gives power to the individuals and doesn't demean its readers. It gives all of its WikiLeaks publishes all of its source material so that people can make up their own mind.
Jen, can you talk about your history with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange? How long you've been working as his attorney?
Well, first, can I say it's great to be here, and thank you for having us. And I want to congratulate Eugene before we even start on a remarkable film and what a beautiful job he's done with it. I haven't seen the last cut, so maybe I'll change my mind. But I can't wait for everyone to see this. So my name is Jen. I've been Julian's lawyer since 2010. So for my sins, I've been his longest-serving lawyer. I got involved back... he had already published Collateral Murder, which is the video of the Americans killing journalists, Reuters journalists and civilians in Iraq. He had published the Afghan war logs, which was the biggest release at that time about showing what was actually happening in Afghanistan and the fact that the war was failing. And I met him just before he published the Iraq war logs. And as a fellow Australian citizen, I saw this Australian who was doing something revolutionary and remarkable for free speech, for the media, and making this incredibly important public interest information available that was so useful to me as a human rights lawyer and to human rights lawyers all over the world. WikiLeaks publications have been used. I've cited it in the International Court of Justice in the case that resulted in the British government handing the Chagos Islands back to the Mauritian government. We've seen it used in cases of extraordinary rendition in the European Court. This is such important information. So for me, I have been involved in every single aspect of Julian's case because I believe in the principle of it. He's a fellow Australian citizen who did the right thing, who was being persecuted, but not just for what it meant for him and for the media, but what it meant for the public and what it meant for human rights accountability globally. But if someone had said to me when I agreed to represent him in 2010, I was a baby lawyer, I was 28 years old, that I'd be sitting here 15 years later, that Donald Trump would become the president twice, that I'd be visiting...
That one surprised us all.
That I'd be visiting Julian in the Ecuadorian embassy with Pamela Anderson, and that I'd end up on a private jet with him, with our former Prime Minister, going to the North Mariana Islands. I wouldn't have believed them, nor would I ever think that I'd be here doing a red carpet with him. But I think the best part of this story, and I hope this comes through in the film and for others, is that you can take on powerful interests and win. And that's what we did.
Well, I want to come back to that victory that you had last summer. But Eugene, you said something to me recently, which is in the course of making this film, as you would ask people what they thought of Julian Assange, one of the most popular reactions you got was confusion about who Julian Assange is, which maybe speaks to the fast moving news, our short attention spans, our state of amnesia. I wonder if you can reflect on that just a moment. So if there's anyone here in the audience who's like, yeah, I know something about that guy, they're not alone.
Yeah, we interviewed people on the street in about 15 or 16 countries, and constantly we would get confusion about who Julian Assange was. And the truth is that Yeah, people don't know what happened before Monday morning. I mean, the news cycle is so fast these days. There is a phenomenon of amnesia generally. But I think in Julian's case, there was a particular sort of method to the madness. The U.S. government went to enormous length to propagandize and stigmatize and smear Julian Assange and make it so that someone who was in the public service, I mean, think of it this way. We all love characters in movies like Star Wars. We like the rebels going up against the Death Star. There aren't that many people that cheer for the Death Star, right? Or Darth Vader. They all cheer for the rebels. They all cheer in the Hunger Games that they overcome the powerful. But somehow when it comes to the real people among us who step forward and put their necks on the lines, like the team of young bandits that surrounded Julian Assange, who were bandits only because they lived in a criminal enterprise, the world run by the United States, Britain, and a handful of other countries. They share information with the public, they empower us all, and we, strangely, are vulnerable to the propaganda generated by those in power against them. Completely contrary to what our own romantic sense of sort of art and movies and literature are. So one of the goals of the film, and the reason he's a $6 billion man, is because it is a spy story. It's an adventure story out of which he emerges triumphant. They kicked the U.S. government's ass. At the end of the day, they won. The U.S. government dropped 17 of the 18 fake counts that they had against Julian Assange, and the last count that he pled, quote, guilty to is of being a journalist. That means we live at a time where to emerge victorious, he had to let the U.S. government effectively jail a journalist for 5 years because he spent 5 years in a British prison, and they wanted that precedent, and they pushed the legal team it was motherhood to the U.S. government that they'd be able to achieve that. Think of this so-called once upon a time seat of democracy spending $6 billion and so many resources to not only bury the truth, but to then use Julian Assange to try to criminalize journalism. He emerges triumphant notwithstanding, and we're here, and he's shown a huge light for all of us on the U.S. government, who is continuing to do this today. It's why the head of 60 Minutes just quit, because he felt the pressure of the U.S. government. It's why ABC had to pay that penalty. We are watching an assault on our right to know as people. People say press freedom and all these terms. It's about whether we know about what is happening in a world that is spinning out of control. And they don't want us to know, and so they bury people like this team who are in the business of helping us. And to me, that's an obvious, must be told again, it must be brought to light, and someone who doesn't know on the street needs to know.
Jen, Eugene did a pretty good job summarizing some of what was at stake in the case that you were fighting. But can you give your own perspective on what was gained last summer when Julian was released from prison?
Well, I mean, other than his freedom and the end of one of the most controversial free speech cases in the world, I think the US got some of its moral authority back to raise free speech issues globally. So one of the key issues and talking points and advocacy points that I said over and over for about a decade was, if the US is going to put an award-winning Australian journalist in prison, and the UK is complicit in that, in a high-security prison in London, how can you speak to Russia or Iran or Pakistan or China or any other country? And what that meant was, and we saw it, Julian was, as Eugene said, the canary in the coal mine. It was the watershed moment. So then we saw the Australian government raid our national broadcaster over the publication of information about Australian war crimes. We then saw Evan Gershkovich arrested in Russia for espionage and put in prison. And it is no surprise to me that after we got Julian Assange out of prison, Russia then released Evan Gershkovich. So the precedent that Julian's case set was not just for him, but it was for what it said to every single other government about what you can do to journalists and what you can get away with. And the United States had no leg to stand on. So we could see, I can give you examples, the Chinese government was tweeting about Julian's case saying, the US cannot speak to us about free speech while Julian Assange is in prison. The president of Azerbaijan, in an interview with the BBC, questioned about his free speech record. Do not talk to me about free speech while Julian Assange is in your prison. And so I think it opens up, it's an important precedent, but what it means is not only is Julian free and that we were able to take on the most powerful government in the world and win, but that plea deal means that Julian cannot be prosecuted for anything else up until the date of the deal. He's free. He can travel anywhere in the world except for the United States, but I don't think he's keen on going there anytime soon after that. But more importantly, the US government admitted in court the lies that they had been telling for a decade. They couldn't identify one person who was harmed as a result of those publications, not one. And you would have all heard it. WikiLeaks has blood on their hands. People have been harmed because of these publications. In court, not one. Not one person. The other allegation was that he was a hacker. And of course, there was no evidence of that. They claimed it for years to try to make this out to be a case that's not about free speech, it's not about media freedom, it's not about publication in the public interest, it's about hacking. No evidence of it whatsoever. So there's no part of that plea deal includes any aspect of hacking. And I think it's really important, and that's what's also important about this film, is that what you think you believe about this case because of what you've read in the media, please suspend those beliefs and watch this film, because it unpicks a lot of these narratives that we were fighting for over a decade. It made it so much harder for me to negotiate his release and to get the support of the Australian government to push the US to achieve the outcome we achieved, because of the propaganda and disinformation in the media that this film does a great job of unpicking.
Can I just
please do.
add on to that? It doesn't go without saying, though, that the Espionage Act is still
That's true.
alive and well. It has been used and it will be used the way they used it against Julian, against the next person who comes along and does something as courageous as he did.
And that's what's so dangerous about it. So people kept saying to us from the very beginning, the Obama administration's not going to prosecute him. No journalist has ever been indicted under the Espionage Act. You're all paranoid. And then, of course, we end up with President Trump, who calls the media the enemy of the people. And suddenly the media understood their own self-interest that we'd been trying to get them to see for 10 years, and were suddenly concerned about the Espionage Act. And what I say to my American friends is, I have spent the last 14 years of my life defending your Constitution and your right to free speech and your First Amendment. Julian spent 14 years of his life in some form of restriction on his liberty in a high-security prison inside the Ecuadorian embassy, fighting for your First Amendment. What are you now going to do about it? And the Espionage Act needs to change.
Joseph, I want to ask a question about the broader landscape of media today. When WikiLeaks started in 2006, and then you had this big breakthrough with Collateral Murder in 2010, it changed in some way profoundly our understanding of what was possible of leaks and of using new tools for investigative reporting. But, in some ways, there have been moments along the way where it felt like, wow, nothing is secret anymore, after a revelation like Edward Snowden or the Panama Papers. And but I wonder, how you see it, how you see the pursuit of these secrets and the way the media processes them, and what gaps still exist in being in the public being well informed about what their governments are doing.
So, if we go back to what was the landscape when WikiLeaks came onto the scene? It was big media organizations who would write a story, tell you what to think, not give you any background to it or no sources. And so that's where WikiLeaks saw, okay, we have a chance here to really allow people to make up their own minds, decide what's going on. We would write a story, we would editorialize it, and would give you all the information. And then, together with the mainstream media, we worked with them on that as well. But that was mostly because we always needed local knowledge. So you have all the source material there. WikiLeaks was that lightning rod. Lots of people lots of organizations, lots of mainstream media had electronic drop boxes, and people started soliciting information and publishing about it. So, for example, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists with the Panama Papers and the Snowden leaks, they did a similar thing, except they didn't actually publish all of the material. I think Snowden and Panama Papers, only 1% of it has been published. That results in a lot of information that many citizen journalists could trawl through. And just think of not just the stories that would come out of that, but the history that is lost to humanity because of that. They might have had their own reasons, they certainly had their own reasons for doing it, and it might have been because they were less courageous than Julian, or because they had less resources, I don't know. Move on a bit, and we had, as you mentioned, the collateral murder video, which was something that the whole world saw and thought, this is extraordinary. Look at what's actually a state-sanctioned murder being filmed. We're now at the state of affairs where we actually see the states filming and broadcasting their own state-sanctioned slaughter. So we've actually, the noise is so great, it's gone beyond it, where you see what's happening in Gaza that's actually been put online by Israeli military. So there's a massive gap. It's almost like it's become normal for 232 journalists in Gaza to be killed. The gap is still there, as in what are the conversations that are being had?
Jen, I wonder if you can reflect. So the case against Julian has come to a good outcome last summer, but I don't think we can all let our shoulders down over government attacks on the free press. So what are the things that you start to focus on now that this case is off your slate?
Well, I think obviously, again, getting Julian out was a huge win, and for many years people told me it would be impossible, and I never believed them. I wouldn't believe them. I had to believe we were going to get him out, because I couldn't live in a democracy where an award-winning Australian journalist was in a high-security prison and for the rest of his life. Can you imagine? The US wanted to send him to prison for 175 years for publishing information for which he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize each year. That risk is still there. So the Espionage Act is still on the books. We have a Trump administration that is wielding its power in ways that are very concerning in terms of the use of warrants against journalists, kicking journalists out of the White House. This sends a message to the rest of the world. So from my point of view, I mean, in terms of, we still have a huge battle for free speech. Whether we're talking in the online space with the platforms and the censorship we're now seeing on Meta right now, or government censorship. I represent Imran Khan down in Pakistan. They can't mention his name on the television. They can't mention his name in the media. Anyone who's speaking about him or advocating for him gets arrested or prosecuted under this horrific electronic legislation. My client's in Gaza, the journalists being killed. I represent the bereaved families of the journalists and the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate. The normalization of the targeting of journalists that we've seen since what happened to Julian is so terrifying. And the pushback we need is much bigger than what we're seeing now. And it's not just about, for me, I'm a free speech lawyer. I defend these cases all over the world. But it's about your rights. It's not just about the rights of journalists to publish. It's about your rights to receive this information and to know what your government's doing, to make informed democratic choices. And that's what Wikileaks was all about, but that's what free speech is all about. And we are at a real turning point in terms of the world and where we are in terms of what we accept in terms of government interference with our free speech. And I think everyone needs to be alert to that and raising concern about it.
Eugene, I wonder what are the things that are motivating, as this film reaches an audience finally, after how many years have you been working on it?
About 4.5.
Yeah. As it reaches an audience, what are you hoping? Actually, let me back up for a second, because for at least 3 of those years that you were working on it, you were working on a film about a person who was in prison. And that changed last year. How did that change your thinking about the film, if it did?
Well, for sure, we started out with the mission that Julian Assange appeared to be unjustly in jail, and our job was to mount a defense of Julian Assange that had not been possible at that scale before. And so we faced a situation where he was in prison in England. He was being tried in the British courts in terms of whether he would be extradited or not. And we thought we would help the court of public opinion think differently about the situation when they next heard a news report about one decision or another by the British court. And if it then escalated in England and went toward the higher courts of England, we prepared for that. Then it looked like it might go to the European Court of Human Rights. That's a slightly different movie, so we prepared for that. And then it looked like doomsday might approach, particularly as we saw the Biden administration continue the policies that had come before and like Trump and all that. And so all of a sudden we were in a situation that it was escalating and escalating toward the possibility that we would have to stop the madness in the United States and make a movie to get him off, and to stop that crisis that Jen mentioned of a 175-year threatened sentence. And then Jen couldn't. We've had a little conversation about this recently. Jen has actually confessed to me, did it on camera, but I didn't put it in the movie, that about a year before Julian got out, as his lawyer, Jen already knew that some measure of tide might be turning in their negotiations with the U.S. government. And Jen knew that we were working our butts off in Berlin trying to make this film. But because of attorney-client privilege, she can't really tell us that it might go better and tell us, prepare yourselves for what might be a very different film. I would say that Jen was kind enough to give me some indications that I might want to be a person who might want to be able to move on his feet should something like that ever happen. And I would say to her enormous credit, she never violated Julian's attorney-client privilege in letting me know, don't be an idiot here. The world could actually have a sort of blue sky outcome here, and what would you do? And I said, oh, I'm ready. We're ready, and my team got ready in the way that we thought. But then the moment it happened, it suddenly became clear to me, and people may know that we pulled the film from Sundance in December, when it was supposed to show at Sundance in January. And we did that for a very important reason. There were really three. But the biggest reason was that the story had seismically changed by the achievement of this incredible outcome that Jen and her team secured on behalf of Julian and WikiLeaks. So we have the film you'll see here is a completely different, triumphant story for all of us in our fight against the dark side, right? The Death Star tried to win. They failed. Thanks to Jen and company and the rest of the rebel army, there was a victory. But it's only one victory, and there will be sequels, and that Death Star plans to continue with its espionage act and X-Wing fighters and whatever else they've got. So the first thing...
X-Wing fighters are with the rebels.
With those other ones called the spider-looking ones, yeah. Yeah, the bad...
TIE fighters, the TIE fighters.
That's good. Sorry. So the second reason was that it became clear to me that Julian could finally be in the film. We could finally feature this triumphant homecoming of Julian going back to his native Australia, actually reuniting with the children he'd never met as a free man, et cetera, and you couldn't not have that. And then the third thing was, and this only dawned on me, and I guess it should have, when Trump got elected, the whole landscape about showing this film in America changed in many, many ways. But the biggest one was, I was going to premiere a film in a country he can't enter, so he can't be at the premiere. So I've heard a rumor he might be here in Cannes. That would be exciting. I haven't seen him in the flesh, but I've heard rumors of sightings on the Croisette. We'll see.
All right.
We can only hope.
But so now that we've arrived at this point, what do you think the film says to people? Given that for 3/4 of the time you were making it, you were trying to say a different thing.
Yeah, the message originally was a rather terrifying message about the need to defend a person and his team who had tried to do good for humanity and were really experiencing the business end of the most brute American power you can imagine. And then, thanks to these guys, they won. And what does that tell all of us about Margaret Mead's adage? Margaret Mead famously told us that, never doubt that a small group of people properly organized can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think Julian stands for that. And I think his team stood by him and devoutly pursued a victory for the world. And I think it's no less than that. And he has incredible scars to show for it, and he's to be endlessly lauded for having stuck to his principles in the face of a world gone very wrong.
Joseph, I want to ask about WikiLeaks today in 2025. Over the course of its nearly 20-year history, it's often had these big moments of revelation, and then maybe is out of sight to most of the public. And I'm sure some people have thought along the way, like, oh, are they still doing what they do? Because if they hadn't, because a member of the general public hadn't seen a big headline recently. But can you talk about what WikiLeaks is today?
I just want to follow on from what Eugene was saying about Julian having many scars. If you think of a person who, when he got on that freedom flight, it was the first time he had seen a horizon in 14 years. And I've known him for 15 years, but only 6 months of that was when he was free, before he had the world's media attacking him, the world's governments attacking him. And in this year that he's been free, I've seen such a difference in him. He's recovering so well. And initially, people say, "What are you doing?" We'd be like, at the moment, Julian's recovering, but we're going to think about things. He's not going to make any public appearances. But come September last year, he was already defined as a political prisoner held in Europe by the Council of Europe. And since then, he's got so much better. And in terms of what WikiLeaks is doing, well, I'm not going to tell you.
Eugene, I want to talk about a couple of the people who are in the film. There's some people I'm not going to talk about who are in the film. I'll let people discover those. But I don't think anyone would be surprised to know that Edward Snowden is in the film. In fact, he, near the start of the film, he says something that I think is an incredible, powerful framing of the story. And I wonder if you can, talk about your enlistment of Edward Snowden.
Sure. This is one of my favorite topics because I remember when we would interview people on the street in all these countries, one of the recurring confusions that people have is you'd ask people, do you know who Julian Assange is? And they would immediately say, isn't he in Russia? So they all very often confuse Julian and Edward Snowden. And what I came to understand is it's kind of like, sort of like Batman and Iron Man or something like that, Batman and Superman. So when I went to go interview Snowden, I really had the feeling I'm interviewing the other guy who kind of thinks he's this guy. And I wonder whether he's in a kind of competition with him for being like the most famous persecuted person who tried to help the public know things. And what I found, to Edward Snowden's incredible credit, and it's also to WikiLeaks' credit, is that Edward Snowden has nothing but incredibly glowing things to say about Superman. Batman sat there and told me some of the most poignant things about Julian and WikiLeaks, and two of them stick out in my mind. He said, Julian Assange may not be the nicest person on the planet, the most this or that, but it would be hard to imagine somebody who's done more for the planet. And he then said, but it's so strange, he said, how people have so much trouble getting past the sharp corners of a person. It's just beautiful. Edward's a beautifully spoken person. But the other thing he went out of his way to make clear, and if people don't know this, it's actually sadly, it's not something that's in the film because I didn't really go into it. But Edward Snowden credits the fact that he was rescued and was able to get to Russia in safety out of the grip of the Americans to WikiLeaks. Edward Snowden said when the media partners that he worked with to release his material, when they saw trouble, they ran for the hills. And he describes WikiLeaks, particularly in the person of Sarah Harrison of WikiLeaks. He says Sarah Harrison and WikiLeaks saw the burning building and went in on his behalf. And he has no question about that. And to hear Batman say that about Superman, I thought, maybe I can believe in the world. It was so beautiful. And then we left him in Moscow, and I watched him disappear, a stateless man with nowhere to go in the world except a government that has him there as a kind of fuck you to America, and that's his place in the world. And I was chilled by watching him disappear into the throngs in Red Square. It was like out of a movie. I couldn't film it because he didn't want me to film him on the street. But I wish I'd had a secret camera. But I have one here, so I'll never forget watching Edward vanish.
Is there anyone else that you interviewed, aside from people that you might like to let the audience discover for themselves in the film, that stood out to you?
A few people, yeah. Naomi Klein, who has historically had some differences with Julian about this topic or that topic. It was beautiful to see Naomi Klein, who's just such an international treasure on all that we need to be worried about, for her to see how absolutely vitally significant Julian is to the current discourse on all of us needing to step up, be those small groups of people that try to fight the power. And I thought her appearance was very meaningful to me. And then other people, we captured, and sometimes people don't even end up in the film. We captured the last interview with Daniel Ellsberg, which we're making a smaller kind of side piece out of, but we didn't put.
So Daniel Ellsberg, for people who may not know, was the person who had leaked the Pentagon Papers in the 1970s. Up until then, one of the most major leaks against the U.S. government.
And I toy with wanting to put Daniel in because part of the problem is it's such a huge story. Not everything that you dream can be in there. But I watched Daniel Ellsberg say, I waited 39 years for someone like Julian Assange to come along. And I want Julian to know that, and I want his team to know that the other people who've really put their necks on the line understand what was thrown at Julian and WikiLeaks, and they understand how hard it is to do what they did on behalf of humanity. And there are several people in the film who took that kind of chance with themselves and on our behalf, and I'm very happy that they're in there, but a bunch of them take risks in the film. There are people in the film doing testimony that violates their immunity deals or that makes them risk being found out as having, we have a couple of people who committed crimes against Julian in the film. And they step forward, we blur them, we hide their identities, but you'll have to hear what they have to say about what 6 billion buys when you want to destroy a person and his operation.
Jen and Joseph, you haven't seen the finished film, but I think you've seen different cuts over time. And as people who have lived inside the bubble and watched all kinds of narratives circulate around WikiLeaks, I wonder what you felt out of Eugene's approach, and what are you hoping are the things that may have been obscured or out of balance in the past that will come out of this film?
Well, for me, as a lawyer who's been part of every single case that Julian has been hit with, it's remarkable the amount of material and the amount of issues that Eugene covers in the film is remarkable. So I've acted for Julian in every case, from the Swedish extradition case, the US extradition case, the Swedish case in Sweden, in the International Court, at the UN, in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights with Ecuador, dealing with his asylum claim in the Ecuadorian embassy. Like, you cannot, when I try to explain to people the number of legal issues and cases that we've had to litigate just to protect him, it's insane. And Eugene unpicks this. But everything from the Swedish allegations, which I think were really challenging at the time for me as his lawyer, because I saw Julian was revered as a hero when he first started publishing all this information, and when those allegations went public, it really took away a huge amount of support, and it was very challenging to navigate that. And you'll see how Eugene deals with it so sensitively in the film to show you what it really was about. But for me, it's this disinformation about Julian, about who he is and about what his mission is, because the mission is so inspiring and important for what it means for the world, and to me that comes through is really important. And I just hope that people will check themselves on what they think they know about the case once they've seen it. And to me, that re-owning the narrative and taking this, we've got him out of prison, but I think there's still a narrative battle to be won about what that was all about and who he is, and I hope this film starts to help us win that narrative back.
I also think so often people view Julian as being isolated, and that was the US government's intention. He was isolated in every way, physically, emotionally. When he was in the embassy, even, they he was so incredibly isolated that when the Ecuadorian government changed, that he wasn't even able to interact with the security guards. And this film shows that actually throughout all of that, he wasn't. He wasn't isolated. There's a lot of good people, a good solid team, and all the individuals out there, people throughout the world and supporters who have always been there for him. And that was very well shown physically a few years ago when people joined hands and held hands and surrounded Parliament in the UK, which actually meant going right around the building, across a river and back. It was a huge 5-kilometer link of people. And I think Eugene's film shows that nicely.
I want to add one thing to that, which is it was our goal all the time in the film to always put Julian in the milieu of his team. Because to be honest with you, when you watch Julian Assange in the many interviews that have been done of him over the years, it all began with him being on a back foot. You accuse someone of rape, you accuse that person of crimes against this and crimes against that, and then you shove a microphone in their face. And it very often, Julian just had to be on the defensive. He actually handles it rather well. But he's also can be a pretty tough person. His interface is not the most like warm and fuzzy interface. But what I learned by spending 4.5 years watching 11 years of footage of him, which is what we were allowed to look at, was that time and time again, this person, he's used to being the smartest guy in the room. He's very used to it. You can see it. And frankly, in most rooms I've ever seen him in all this footage, he kind of is the smartest person in the room. And yet, he's an unbelievably good listener. I have endless footage of him listening to members of his team and distilling their viewpoints into sort of metabolizing it into whatever he does. And so I felt it would have been unfair if we continued this mythology that the US government wanted us to believe of this kind of isolated evil genius like Joseph is talking about. In fact, it was a Hamish group of young people, very cute people, all over each other, working day and night in incredibly odd ways and this and that with bare feet. He's even got bare feet and an ankle bracket at one point because the British government put a device on him to track him. And they were all just going about their business. I even have footage of them going to the ocean, and he's swimming in the ocean with this thing on. So they're going about the business of being young people in a mission to help the world against those in power. And that mission, that team effort that includes Jen and Joseph and so many others that we feature in the film, that's where it's a model for all of us, because none of us are Julian, and you can't always have a Julian. You need to have a collective to go up against this and share courage with each other, and that was a big goal we had.
I hope people realize how much behind the scenes footage there is. So Eugene's been filming with us for 4 years?
4.5, yeah.
4.5 years, but we had cameras filming with Julian since the very beginning. Yeah. So the behind the scenes views...
Actually, Juan is here. Juan, who filmed most of it in the white shirt over there. Juan is deeply responsible for the footage that's in the film.
So Juan's been filming with us since 2010, as long as I've been working with Julian. So the behind-the-scenes footage is really remarkable. You were about to see something that you have not seen anywhere else. And really, for us, we were all working in a very sensitive environment where security was an issue. So to get this behind-the-scenes view is remarkable. But I think what the film also shows is that for us, working with Julian was incredibly exciting. We were at the forefront of some of the biggest geopolitical issues of the day, and constantly, and working together with such a small team with so little resources. It was exciting, terrifying, exhausting, but also wonderful to work with such a small team that I think changed the world.
The one thing I think is not so great about Eugene's film is how much we've aged.
We teased Julian, we've all got grey
Not Jen.
wrinkles.
Yeah, other than Jen. Yeah, exactly. Speak for yourself. Yeah. I mean, one thing for people who may not know this is that the technology was a big part of this. What Julian Assange and Wikileaks saw was that as we moved into the information age, which was really going to be very empowering to central governments and corporations mining our data and doing all that terrible stuff, Assange and Wikileaks were really the first people to see a huge possibility to empower the public, that you could enable through the internet, you could enable a whistleblower like Chelsea Manning, who once upon a time would have had to bring sensitive documents to a shadowy parking garage and risk life and limb, you could offer that person an anonymous way of uploading this stuff to the world. So if anybody wonders what WikiLeaks was, it was a Dropbox. It was an anonymous Dropbox that used Julian's understanding and his team's understanding of technology to protect whistleblowers. And that's in our interest. It's what we all need. We all need people from government and people from corporations willing to say what we are doing is not right. And those people need protection. They were never protected before. And the US government wanted to stop at nothing, not only to punish Julian and his team for doing that, but to make sure none of us use that Dropbox. Sure, you've got a Dropbox, but we'll go after you like we go after him.
We're going to leave this here. You can be amongst the first audience in the world to see the $6 billion man if you work the ticket system correctly and get in for Wednesday. Good luck. And if you stick around here, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we're going to be back with another panel highlighting this new Golden Globes documentary award that was just announced a few days ago for the first time. It's really an exciting initiative. The jury who helped select that award is going to name the winner and discuss where they're coming from in just about 15 minutes. So please stick around. Thank you to Joseph Farrell, Jen Robinson, and Eugene Jarecki. Thank you for coming.